Alright, I want to show you all a little bit about using VMware. It's a pretty easy program to use, and you can probably mess around with it and figure most of this stuff out yourself. So feel free to explore it yourself. But I do want to show you a couple little basic things about it to make sure you're aware of. And I also want to note that the version of Workstation I have is about 6 months old, so if yours looks a little bit different, most of the features should be pretty much the same that I'm about to show you. One thing to be aware of with VMware Workstation are these tabs up here. As you create a virtual machine, it'll create a tab for it. One reason I want to note that is, let's say this is your Windows 7 machine here, and you wanted to, we get to the point where you have to install the Windows 10 machine. Just click on this Home tab up here, and notice, so you can go back and forth between those tabs, but notice here is where you'll create a new virtual machine. So just be aware that's how you get to that. Another thing with these tabs is, let's say this is my Linux machine, so let's say I close this tab. To bring that back up, they're all available over here, right? So for example, if I want to bring up my Windows 7 machine, I could click here, and it will open a tab for that. And once again, you'll have your Home tab, and then you'll have your tab for the virtual machine. Alright, so once you get your virtual machine installed, I want to show you a little bit about how to kind of use it and access it using VMware as well. So like most programs, there's a couple ways to do it. So if this were my Windows 7 machine and I wanted to power it up, as you can see, the best way to do it is click right here. But notice up here on the toolbar, you could also do it from here. You could click the little green start button up there as well. That's notable because you can also do other things from up there, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Also, just be aware when you're installing your virtual machines, it's important to be patient, let it install. If you don't have a newer laptop with a lot of power, my laptop's a few years old, so sometimes during the install it'll seem like it's just sitting there frozen. Give it a few minutes, let it finish the install. That's very important. Alright, so I'm going to power on this machine and just show you a couple things about using your virtual machine, whether it be Windows 7 or Windows 10 or whichever ones we create in this class. So I'm going to start this up. And it'll probably take a moment or two to start up, so again, bear with it. But once it gets your machine gets loaded up, I want to show you a couple important things about just sort of how to use it in the VMware. Alright, so the first thing I want to point out is doing a maximizing your VM so you can kind of see your whole screen in there. And before I do that, when you're installing your virtual machine, make sure you let it finish, reboot, do everything it needs to do, because at the very end, after your Windows desktop comes up, don't just start clicking things, because it still needs to install VMware tools in order for this maximize feature that I'm about to show you to work. So be sure when you're first installing it, just be patient and let it go all the way through, reboot a couple times, and install those VMware tools. Alright, so anyway, to use these VMs, what I'd really recommend is go up here to the top and do a full screen mode. That's really the best way to use your virtual machine. That way you can access the toolbars and everything that you need to access in your virtual machine. When you do that, this may or may not disappear. If it disappears like mine did, I would recommend pinning it. That way you always have this so that you can go back to that, exit the full screen mode and get back out. So that's important to understand with the virtual machine. So the other things I need to show you, they don't really need to be in full screen, so I'm just going to get back out of that mode and show you a couple more things to be aware of with your VM when it's running. One is working outside your VM versus inside of it. So sometimes if you want to access something in your virtual machine, you need to sort of click in there to get the mouse to go into that virtual machine. Otherwise, it'll be out here in your main PC. So just be aware of that. You might have to sort of click in there before you can start sort of working with the things in your virtual machine. And along with that, to get out of that, if your mouse is in the virtual machine and you want to get back out here and it's not doing it for some reason, you can do Control and Alt on your keyboard, and notice that sort of gets me out back into my PC and not in the virtual machine. So you can kind of click in there to get in it. It should let you out, but depending again on the VMware tools, if you need to get out, you can do Control Alt. One more thing to be aware of, or actually a couple more things. Sometimes your virtual machine might freeze up. Again, if it's during install, try to be patient with it, but any other time, if it seems to freeze up, you can use these buttons again. Remember the start button was up here. I don't recommend doing this unless your VM is frozen, but you can go up here and you can shut down your VM that way. So if this is not responding, the stuff you're doing in your virtual machine isn't responding, just go up here in your VMware workstation and shut it down that way. However, the way you want to shut down your VM, let's say you do a lab and you're using this Windows 7 virtual machine and you're finished with the lab and you want to sort of shut it down so you can just close out of your VMware and all that. To do that, you want to shut down like you normally would from the start button. So inside the virtual machine, you want to click down in the start button and do a shutdown that way. Alright, so to shut down your virtual machine, again, don't use this unless it's totally frozen. Shut it down just like it's a normal computer. So in the Windows 7, click your start and shut it down this way. That's all I really have as far as tips for using VMware.